a warm welcome to this talk. It's actually Monday, the 16th of October, and I'm delighted to welcome Mr. Philipp Krusea, who is talking all the way from Zurich. And I want to start off with an apology, Philipp, this morning, because I misattributed your nationality on our previous video when I was talking about your address to the European Parliament in Strasbourg. So if you can forgive me, thank you for coming on.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for having me, dear John Campbell. And there is no worry and no need for apologies. We are all in this one global family, and nationalities don't matter in this respect.
Absolutely. Why should people watch this video, Philipp? What is this concern about?
Well, I'm about to deepen what I said in the European Parliament on the 13th September. I'm personally concerned about, most of all, the new international health regulations, because they will bring about a regime by which the World Health Organization will be granted the power to at any time suspend our constitutions, to suspend our human rights and international law, and with permanent effect, thereby assuming and abusing global power and ultimately causing harm, maximum harm to people's health, maximum harm to economies and to our democracies.
And this is all happening now by default.
Yes, this is right. Negotiations are underway, and the vote on what I just mentioned, that is the international health regulations, the amendments to it, that vote will take place next May in Geneva at the occasion of the World Health Assembly. And then right afterwards, these amendments will come into force by way of an automatism. There will be no vote in the national parliaments, and therefore we should be worried about and make sure that ultimately these international health regulations amendments will not come into place. In my view, even the negotiations should be stopped immediately.
So this is this sounds like a really stealthy process by an international organization to take over many aspects of what should be domestic governance.
Yes, absolutely. They claim the power on the total power on the pretext of protecting us against biological threat. And what they do is they use and abuse this pretext to self-authorize them to ultimately impose on us all kind of measures where nobody knows the effect of them, that can be harmful, and without asking us, and obviously without any informed consent. Most of all, they are totally immune. They are not subject to any liability, the officials from this World Health Organization.
Mm-hmm. And of course, we're not saying it's true in this situation, but threats can be generated to facilitate a response sometimes.
Yes, absolutely. There will be a new widened concept of what is called public health emergency of international concern. So the emergency for a pandemic. The widening concept comprises things like even climate change, reduction of the CO2 level will matter. All kinds of elements can give rise to a proclamation of a new pandemic, and so we have the total, rule of emergency logic threatening us to become the new normal, and our constitutional normal to become the absolute exception in the future.
So the WHO can define whatever it basically likes as a threat, and then impose these draconian powers on individual nation states, whether there's a real threat there or not.
Yes, absolutely. And most significantly, they will define what kind of medical substance they deem to be the only ones that shall be applied by people, and how much that should be done, the percentage, the coverage of these injections on all the population without actually telling us what the content of the substances is, and obviously without any proof of efficacy and any proof of safety. We have seen that in the past 3 years.
Yeah, that sounds pretty terrifying, that medication could potentially be inflicted on people with the power of the nation state behind it. This is a really frightening development. Shall we go on and look at the first slide to look at some of the detail here, please, Philip?
Yes, great. Thank you. Now, what we see here is we are in a process where two legal instruments are subject to negotiations. On the upper line of this working stream, the international health regulations, this is ultimately an international agreement already itself that is in force since 2005, and that was the basis for calling out the COVID-19 pandemic. And so this legal instrument shall be amended in a widest possible way to give WHO more power. It will be subject to a vote, these amendments, next World Health Assembly in May 2024, and only a simple majority will be sufficient for the member states to adopt these new health regulations. Noting we have 194 member states, and then, as I mentioned, just by way of an automatism, these new amendments will enter into force into every member state. Whereas we have a second working stream concerning the new pandemic treaty, which is a totally new agreement that so far did not exist. And there we will have to, or the member states will have to observe a 2/3 majority at the occasion of next World Assembly. And then, most significantly, there will be a period of 18 months during which within every member state there shall take place a parliamentary debate and ultimately a ratification process. So that gives a minimum amount of democratic legitimacy, whereas for the first legal instruments, the international health regulations, that will be just done by the World Health Assembly, and we can do nothing against it unless our government sends a note of rejection to the World Health Assembly's General Director. And this is outside of the reach of the people. This is totally within the discretion of our governments. So we have no democratic control for the rejection of these international health regulation amendments.
So this is almost like a pincer movement from the World Health Organization, isn't it? These both derive from the WHO. And for some strange, mysterious reason, they're both running concurrently at the same time.
Yes, the purpose is actually to grant WHO much more power and much more financial means and strengthen their structures to what they call have a better pandemic prevention, better pandemic preparedness, and make sure that these substances and drugs of all ways, of all kinds, will be equally distributed among the population, which they call the principle of equity. And it seems that this principle of equal distribution between the nations is more important than the fundamental rights that so far we have written in the Article 3, Paragraph 1 of the International Health Regulations. They are crossed out and replaced by this principle of equity.
Mm-hmm. It's not so much the equity that bothers me, it's what's being distributed that I find most concerning. But yeah.
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah, pretty terrifying. Do you want to talk more detail about this slide, or do you want to go on to the next one?
We can go into the content of the international health regulations, what really should concern everybody. Yes, the next slide, please.
Yeah,
yes.
I think that's coming. There we are.
Excellent. So we see here 6 points, and these 6 points are really concerning to everybody who calls himself a Democrat, for everybody who likes fundamental rights and thinks that actually we are the ones in power. We should self-define our government and the system under which we want to live. Most of all, we want to have an effective protection of human rights.
Yes.
So what we see are here these 6 points. And the good message about these very concerning elements is we can see them very clearly within the international health regulations. So they are in front of our eyes. And so I briefly give an overview and just a brief summary of what, in my view, are the most frightening elements within these new amendments. So number one, the mechanism, that already existing mechanism for self-authorization of the WHO by mere declaration of a public health emergency of international concern. So the abbreviation for that is fake. So this mechanism is widely extended, not only to really threatening diseases, but even to new variants of common flu, or even, as I said, under this concept of One Health, it is extended to problems of climate change or problems of whatever we find in the environment to be a potential threat. So that opens the door actually to a total abuse of power, and so WHO can declare an emergency situation for the entire globe without any real reason, without any justification, and most of all, there will be no remedy, no mechanism to revise this decision. There will be no checks and balances for that part.
A public health emergency of international concern is what I say it is, existing when I say it does.
This is correct.
This is terrifying.
They just need to whisper it into the microphone in Geneva and call it out, and that will change the ordinary course of the entire globe. Can you imagine? Without any proof, without any real substance and evidence, they can just call it out and extend it. As we have seen it already, it was declared for more than 3 years for the purpose of COVID-19. So that we will see more of the same in the future.
And the World Health Organization has been bad enough over these previous 3 years, based on the very weak powers given by the 2005 international health regulations. What like with the draconian powers for the amendments that will be passed in 2024 doesn't bear thinking about.
Absolutely, John. That's exactly the concern. Now, for point number 2, we see clear evidence in this new wording that the recommendations that so far were meant to be just non-binding recommendations will in the future have the character to be legally binding. And we can, if somebody would object to that, go immediately into the respective provisions, the amendments, which is, among others, Article 13A and Article 42. But there's a whole set also in the regime of supervising the implementation of any new legally binding recommendation for the future. So if one member state even thinks, we are not going to apply mRNA-based vaccines, we are rather trying it with vitamin D and with good physical exercise, then this government will be put on the watch list. And there will be the World Health Assembly to decide about sanctions against this government. So we can see that very clearly. The number 3, which in my view is actually the most concerning one, because WHO shall be granted the global privilege of exercising the information monopoly, information control, with the right to censorship, and of course the right of manipulating the people. This shall become the new normal, and of course we have seen that already in the past 3 years. We see it now, how difficult it is to maintain on YouTube or on Facebook an deviating opinion and scientific information as soon as it comes to mRNA-based vaccines or any critics against WHO. So that's already in place. We have seen that, by the way, in this Event 201 exercise, chapter number 4. They speak explicitly in October 2019. They speak explicitly about this, what they call infodemic. They say, oh, wrong information might be as dangerous as a virus itself, so we have to fight against infodemic. We have to fight against disinformation. So all of that comes together. And if you manipulate long enough the public opinion, if there's only one information and source of information available, then ultimately you cannot have any science. You cannot have any true judicial system and fair trials. And ultimately you don't have any democracy.
It's the same thing again. Truth is what I say it is, existing when I say it is, and you're not allowed to disagree. This is just totalitarianism.
This is the way to totalitarianism. It's a perfect tool in the hand of every dictator, and we must oppose this principle, because we have been fighting for here in Europe, at least for more than 250 years, to have this freedom of information and freedom of speech be protected since the French Revolution, and now they just want to take it away under the disguise of health protection. Yes. So then in point number 4, which is very concerning, and that's an objective point, there's no system, no mechanism that would actually would it allow to challenge WHO's decision and recommendations. So no checks and no checks and balances, which is a very normal part of every government, of every democracy, of every mechanism of power, in order to make sure actually that there is a quality control, a quality management, and this we don't have it here. They didn't even try to do this quality control with respect to the past 3 years, so they didn't hold an after-action review, something that is done in every government, that is done in military, that is done everywhere where humans do and undertake a huge investment with an external effect. So this basic principle of quality control and quality management was not performed by WHO for the past. So, and for the future, it will be not part of this new set of international health regulations. That's very concerning. And number 5, that's briefly said, of course, they will not assume any kind of accountability for whatever they are doing. So there's no incentive actually to do things better. There's no incentive for WHO to avoid harm. And they are even protected by full immunity. And here in Switzerland, they have their domicile. They even enjoy full tax exemption. So this is an absolute,
Which I enjoyed full tax exemption.
Yes, this is actually a recipe and a free pass for WHO to abuse their powers, because there will be no accountability, no punishment whatsoever. And so ultimately, question number 6, with respect to fundamental rights, you don't even have to ask whether they want to write it back again into the International Health Regulations, Article 3, Paragraph 1. It will not matter, even if they would reintroduce the fundamental rights principle in Article 3, Paragraph 1 of the International Health Regulations. I see no chance for an effective protection of fundamental rights and human dignity as long as the entire population and the judges and the politicians will only receive and view one global monopolized truth. So if we only know that all these substances, they are super effective, they are super safe, and they make us strong, what else could then a judge decide about these substances? Just to give one example of many. So I see fundamental rights and human dignity as the result of such a concept. I see them coming to an end. There will be no effective protection possible with such a system of international health regulations.
And it's not being too melodramatic to say that this is what previous generations have fought and died to avoid.
Absolutely.
And now it's just being taken by stealth, and our politicians just seem to be saying, "Oh, okay, fine."
It is taken by stealth. Politicians don't know anything about these amendments, and they just let it happen. The only good message we have is it takes place at plain sight. So once a person with a minimum amount of responsibility, once this person would understand what is going on here, actually nobody would probably wish to have such a regime being imposed for the future, for the rest of our lives, where somebody can tell us, oh, now, by the way, we have emergency, you stay at home, unless you have taken 3 shots of this highly experimental, very dangerous drug. Don't dare to even question our orders. Don't go for a second opinion. Just take it. Nobody wants to have this as our new normal.
But it's not even just our lives. I mean, we've seen in some vile regimes around the world, North Korea, for example, that the totalitarian powers have been perpetuated down several generations of dictator, oppressing whole groups of people.
Yes, John, this is actually the most concerning aspect here. By having established this system, it will become very difficult to stop it. There will be no stop button for us. They can perpetuate and even strengthen their power, the WHO power, and combine it with the power of United Nations, combine it with the power of the G7, of the WHO, the WEF, World Economic Forum, and introduce all kinds of new elements to this so-called anti-pandemic or pandemic prevention.
And indeed, even power to particular wealthy individuals who might be financing some of these organizations.
Absolutely key here, yes. WHO is funded only by 16 to 20% by member states' ordinary payments. So 80% of the payments of the funding of WHO so far in the past years were extraordinary payments. And from these extraordinary payments, the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, together with Gavi, which is actually in cooperation with the purpose of selling and maximize the sales of vaccines, they have obviously a business interest. So the majority of the extra funding of WHO came from this conglomerate Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, together with Gavi. That's one way of looking at it. Another way of looking at it is that out of this 80% of extraordinary payments, we have 80% again where payments are made under a certain condition that is defined by the sponsor. So it's a sponsor-driven financing of WHO, ultimately making WHO a puppet and marketing agency for the producers.
In England, we have a saying in the UK, he who pays the fiddler calls the tune.
Absolutely. That's such a great saying, making things so much easier to understand.
I'm sure you have an equivalent saying in Swiss and German and French.
Yes, we do have, absolutely. Probably in every country.
Sure, yeah. Should we go on to the next slide, Philip?
Yes, we can wrap it up. So all that together, what we have seen now, this new regime, this revision, these new international health regulations, they are toxic by design. Because these amendments to the international health regulations, they allow the WHO to at any time suspend our constitutions, suspend human rights, and even international mandatory law with a permanent effect. And they can extend it forever, thereby assuming and abusing global power, and as I said already, causing maximum harm. And if you go to the last slide, all of this is done most notably with all elements of totalitarianism. They can do it with propaganda, with fear, push it through with executive power, and without, obviously, our consent. We have never a chance and never a saying to say yes to these international regulations, which most of what I just mentioned actually finds no legal basis in the constitution of WHO itself. There is no legal basis in the WHO constitution to make recommendations legally binding, and there is no legal basis in the WHO constitution to exercise propaganda and manipulate people into harmful behavior and into giving their consent, which obviously is not an informed consent without the correct information and the freedom to decide. And ultimately, there will be no remedy and no stop button. They can go on forever and forever. And this is why we have to say, not only stop these international health regulations amendments, stop the process of negotiating immediately. So we have to put pressure on our political representatives. We have to put on a huge pressure on our governments and say that the content of these amendments in itself is anti-constitutional. It threatens our constitution. It threatens our future, our business, our lives ultimately. So stop negotiating about these kinds of harmful new regulations. We don't want them. So we have to increase power against that process.
Yeah, thank you. As things stand at the moment, is this affecting all countries in the world? I mean, are we talking about the United States, Canada, New Zealand, Australia, Switzerland, Germany, France, Scotland, England, everywhere?
Well, this is correct. It's actually affecting the 194 member states of the WHO. Yes, so that gives us a huge potential to resist here, to unite over the borders of our countries. And this is what we do already here in Europe with the joint combined forces between the different countries. Even we reach out and have a good cooperation with our friends in Canada and in the United States. James Rogoski does a great work. Meryl Noss from Children's Health Defense. James Corbett, great work here. And we are about all of, in our communities to produce letters that can be sent to our political representatives to put on some pressure and actually call them to stop negotiations. Stop these negotiations. That must be our message.
And it has to be the head of state, actually, that sends the letter, I think, doesn't it, to say, no, this is not for us. So we have to somehow get to heads of state through our politicians too. Through
our politicians, right. Ultimately, this notification of rejection must be issued by the government, and the stop to halt these negotiations, of course, this is within the competence of the government. But the guardians for our democracy, these are the members of our parliaments. They are responsible to safeguard our rights, the constitutional order, and make sure that the constitution will never become under threat. And that was actually the purpose of the presentation of 13th September in Strasbourg at this expert hearing that was granted by some excellent members of parliament of the EU Parliament. They gave us possibility to speak out. Christine Anderson and Virginie Joron and Christian Terres. And so all of that was organized by Maria Hubner-Mock, a doctor from Austria. And so the purpose of that was to shed light on this process from different disciplines, not only from the legal discipline, but also from the medical discipline, then also from a criminal investigation perspective. So therefore, we had these 8 experts there, even from the perspective of mass formation psychology. Professor Matthias Desmet from Belgium was there. So we covered the whole range of relevant disciplines to actually bring light into the dark, because we are not informed. We are absolutely not informed by our media, not by our politicians.
No. The media has let us down despicably, in my view. I mean, if there were thousands of troops and tanks and helicopter gunships at our borders, we would see the threat and politicians would act.
Yes.
This is being done surreptitiously, below the counter. This is a stealthy operation. And to my mind, just as big a threat.
This is it. Absolutely, John.
They're just drifting into this.
The threat is either made up or self-produced.
Yeah.
One way or the other.
But the end result is that the populations are controlled.
The populations shall be controlled, and this is what we have to resist, because we have an universal right of self-determination, the self-determination of the people as collective, but also the right for self-determination of the individuum. This is pre-existing to written law. It is pre-existing to governments. And it is written down, actually, in the United Nations Charter of 1945. This is Article 1. It was written down as a consequence of the 2 big world wars to something that we never wanted to give up again. And now we put it at stake. No, this is absolutely not acceptable.
Yep. So we need to try and mobilise our politicians, tell them about this danger. The fact that they haven't recognised this danger already is at least disappointing. We would expect them to be vigilant of our personal freedoms, but it seems they're not.
Absolutely.
So if we remind now, if world leaders are watching this and they all immediately send these letters off to stop these regulations, that's good. If not, then the individual people that are watching need to contact their politicians to tell their heads of state to get their acts together.
Absolutely. This is what we have to do, John. Yes. Great.
And let's hope a few more people do it as a result of this. Philip, thank you so much. It's just so reassuring that people with your understanding are working on this to protect the human rights of everyone. It's disappointing that the politicians are not doing it. But basically, on behalf of, as far as I can speak for the population of the world, thank you for what you're doing. We really, really appreciate it.
Oh, thank you, John. It's a privilege to be here on your show. And number 2, thank you for your work. And we are in this all together. There are so many experts now who speak out all together. And in my view, I'm convinced that these extreme regulations, they are radical by definition. They are toxic by definition. They will not come into force because the people will resist. We will do that all together. So thank you very much for helping in this process, John.
Yeah,
Very important work that you are doing.
Great to talk to you. I know you've got to scoot off somewhere else in Europe now, so your time is precious. So thank you very much.
Thank you very much for having me. All the best.
Thank you. You too.